You must not watch this. I'm warning you, you can never unsee it. But if you do watch, Richard Lloyd. I'm Richard Lloyd. This is Earth, 2016. I've put things together into some kind of order so that you can understand, so you can have some idea why I like Sleep No More so much. Sorry about that. I don't fully understand why people hate it so passionately. But, anyway, this is what I think. Now, I started defending Series 9 a whole 8 weeks ago now. But to be honest, it's this moment in particular, this review, that I've been waiting to do for a very long time. Yes, I've done 8 more reviews before this, but for a series called Defending Series 9, I've not really had much to do in terms of defending them, because for the most part, they're already so well regarded by fans. But Sleep No More is such a controversial episode. You either love it, or you hate it, or some people are in between. But generally, it's so misunderstood, I think, by Doctor Who fans. I think they either just don't get it, or they don't want to give it a chance. They don't like what they see. But I have to disagree completely. I really, really love Sleep No More, and I say that seriously. I recognise it's got its flaws. It's not a perfect episode by any means, and it's probably the weakest of Series 9. But for me, there's something about Sleep No More that really kind of attracts me to it. I'm not really sure if that's influenced by the amount of hate it gets, but it's the same for Love and Monsters, another very controversial episode. And again, it's not perfect, but there's something about it that I just can't resist loving, I can't help loving. And I'm going to try and explain why in this video. Now, it's going to be structured a little bit differently to usual. Basically, this week, I've grouped my notes into the most 3 controversial kind of elements of Sleep No More, and I've also picked comments from Twitter and from YouTube from all of you guys, and I'm going to kind of intersperse them with my comments and try and argue any of the negative things you say. You know, this is going to be a bit more of an argument than usual, because there are people that really hate Sleep No More, and I want to try and prove them wrong. So without further ado, the first section is found footage and the plot. So while there are some positive comments about the found footage style and the writing, some say that the writing isn't very good, and also that the found footage kind of lied to us in a way. It told us it was going to be one thing, as in really traditional found footage, and then it turned into something else with the thing with the eye dust. Another comment said the twist about the eye dust was really stupid, and the episode as a whole is very boring. So they're the negatives out the way first. For me, the found footage is so integral, I think, to why I like this episode. I mean, yes, it's not a traditional found footage style, but then the show takes the found footage style and it puts its own stamp and own spin on it. Basically, for me, if it was just standard found footage, it wouldn't really qualify as Doctor Who. I mean, I know this is a bit controversial, but it's like having purely historical stories. I mean, yes, in the 60s when the show started, there were some purely historical stories, but these days, you need an alien or something else there, something more sci-fi, to make it Doctor Who, and so the audience can kind of recognise it as Doctor Who. And I think for me, that's why I like the fact that it's not standard traditional found footage. It's unique and a new kind of genre, a new style if you like. And that's what the show does best. It takes traditional styles and genres and kind of subverts them, puts its own stamp on them, and adds in a bit of sci-fi, and you have something completely different. Looking at my notes, the found footage is very intriguing from the start, and definitely indicates that what the viewer is about to watch is very different to any normal episode of Doctor Who. I also think it's utilised well to make the viewer feel like they're really on the Leverrier space station. Of course, the thing about the eye dust, with all the shots being from the point of view of the characters, does help add to that. But when I was watching it, I really felt like I was in on the action, like I was there with the characters. I also thought it was very atmospheric, particularly because of the moody lighting and the abstract score and sound effects in the background. And in my opinion, it actually feels quite 60s, probably because of the limited colour palette, because it's almost kind of black and white with the simple colours, and low saturation. You know, almost like a second Doctor based on the Siege story. I've already mentioned how it feels like you're in on the action and you're there on the space station, and one point where the director makes this really effective is when the Doctor is talking about how he sleeps, and he reveals to Clara that he sleeps when you're not looking. But this is shown from Clara's point of view, so there's this kind of second meaning, because he's sort of breaking the fourth wall and talking to the audience and saying, I sleep when you're not looking, i.e. in between episodes off air, which, apart from being amusing, again makes you feel like you're there, almost like you're the Doctor's companion there with him on the space station. I'm sort of going off on a tangent here, but I really enjoyed fully getting the Macbeth reference this time round. The title itself, Sleep No More, is a quotation from the play, which I was fortunate enough to go and watch at the Globe back in September, as some of you might already know, so it was nice to finally have that context when watching this episode again. In terms of the climax of the plot, for me, the revelation that it's Rasmussen who is behind the whole scheme completely subverts our expectations, because we're immediately drawn into siding with him at the start of the episode. You know, you feel for him, you feel he's quite an innocent character, and that he's pieced together this footage to show what happened, and you don't really have any reason to believe that he has any ulterior motives. So of course, this move really shakes things up. And his death is actually very impactful, I think, because it just seems to come out of nowhere. It's very quick, very sudden, which works well. And again, it kind of feels very real. It feels like you're actually there, and this is really happening in the real world, sort of. You know, this isn't a sci-fi laser extermination kind of death. This is real. Then, of course, Rasmussen is somewhat resurrected into a Sandman. It's a horrifying image, really well done by the design department. And of course, the final reveal that the sleep virus has been embedded into the static of the broadcast we've just been watching is a brilliant final twist. For me, that is just the icing on the cake. It's so genius, and a fitting end for such a unique tale. I mean, you've got to appreciate just how much thought went into the plot of the story in the first place. We start with Rasmussen saying, "Do not watch this." Now, of course, that's meant to draw the viewer in. It's not meant to put them off. They're not going to listen to him, because, you know, you can hear all the eerie stuff in the background, you can see the deserted space station, and you're wondering what's happened and what's gone on. So the purpose of that isn't actually to send the audience away, but to draw them in closer, and to make them listen to exactly what's happening. And in doing that, Rasmussen secures his audience, and makes sure that people are watching, so that the sleep virus can be released as they're watching it. You know, if he'd said, "Do watch this," it wouldn't have been quite so gripping. And of course, the Doctor's final line is, "None of this makes any sense." Now, as the viewer, I agree, but this works so well for the story, because there isn't really a kind of definitive end point. It's almost like it's ended with Rasmussen winning, because he's been successful into drawing in an audience, and now, as they've watched this broadcast, the sleep virus has been working away into their heads. However, I would still like to see the sequel that's been mooted by Gatiss in interviews, because it would add so much more to this story. I think it would make people appreciate it even more, having some more backstory, perhaps like a prequel, or even an actual sequel taking place after events, and looking at the effect of the new Morpheus pods and of the new sleep virus on the people of Neptune or its moons. So here are some of my more positive comments. Bits that stand out for me are this one from Daniel Holloman, who says that when watching the episode for a second time, he just realised how many people hate it, and doesn't understand why. The episode was shot beautifully, and he loved the twists it had. That really rings with me. It's exactly how I feel. I just don't get how so many people can hate such a clever story. Similarly, this one from Joey says that it's very underrated, and yes, it's got flaws, I agree with you there, but they're blown way out of proportion, and it's not even close to being the worst story of all time. He also says the story takes a little while to adjust, but gives it a 7 out of 10, as does Sideleader 1010. Again, he's not really sure what to make of it. It does feel disjointed at times, hard to tell what's going on, and the resolution is a bit blink and you'll miss it. But the bit that I really agree with is how he appreciates the fact that the production team tries to do something different with the found footage style, because it's not just the traditional one, it's something unique and something new. And I think the story will definitely stand out as a very unique one in years to come. In my opinion, it's the kind of story that people are going to look back on and think, wow, how did viewers at the time hate this? This is a really clever piece of writing and a very unique story. And to sum up this section, Jimmy Wolf, aka Captain Jimmy Pie, says, "It wasn't the fan footage story we'd all hoped we'd get, But in fairness, it was very well done and unique in terms of how the fan footage aspect was done, by making it not actually found footage. And I definitely agree with you when you say that you'd love to see a proper, in inverted commas, found footage episode in the future, but this certainly touched new ground in the genre. Because that's the thing, yes, this isn't exactly traditional found footage, but it does kind of leave scope in the future for the show to explore different types of found footage, because it's not the kind of thing you can just do once. There are loads of different things that you could do with it. I think it was James Blowers on Twitter who suggested that having a story where the Doctor and Clara piece together the found footage to work out what happened, as the audience does, as the story progresses. And I agree, but I don't see that as an alternative to Sleep No More, because Sleep No More in its own right is very clever in the way that it uses the fan footage, but that is the type of plot that we could see in the future, and Sleep No More doesn't really do anything to stop that from happening in a future series. This next section is quite brief, but I think it's quite important to the understanding of the story. It's cast and characterisation. Now I'll start with a positive. Reece Shearsmith gives a fantastic performance in the role of Rasmussen. I've already mentioned this really, but you really believe he's innocent to start with, and then when he turns, he's so villainous. I think he was exactly the right person for the part, and I'm glad Mark Gatiss held him back, as a friend of his, to appear in this episode, and he wasn't cast earlier, because the role fitted him really well, and he gave a fantastic performance, definitely the standout performance of the episode for me. Now on the other hand, one of my comments said the characters are as weak as water, but on the other hand, another one acknowledges that you don't actually have to like leads, and that is what I'm going to kind of go on to say now. The 4 crew members are in no way the best guest characters that Doctor Who has ever had, but I can't help thinking, is that not sort of the point? They're just ordinary people, they're nothing special, and they don't really want to be here on this rescue mission, you know, in this spooky, dark base. I mean, who would want to be there? I don't really think it's a case of them not being written well, as many people accuse Gatiss of doing, because clearly he intended for them to not be very likeable, and I think in a way, that makes the story kind of sit less well with viewers, and make them feel even more uneasy and unnerved by the events, because these aren't nice, relatable characters. This is real life. They're real, kind of, well, unpleasant, shall we say, or not particularly pleasant people. So overall, I just feel, really, that while the characters aren't great, there's not a whole lot that could have been done about them. And also, they're not integral to the story. They're a very small part of the story. They're just there in the background, really. And by having them there in the background, it allows us to explore new ideas and concepts, and that's what I'm going to go on to talk about next. There are so many new ideas from Gatiss in the story. For example, the thing about India and Japan merging to create one country. Yes, this is a plot point that is barely developed, but kind of like the supporting characters, it doesn't need to be. Throughout the episode, for me at least, there's an overwhelming feeling of kind of mystery and unease, because we know so little about the world, the society that we've been launched into in the first person, as it feels. Furthermore, we never see the full sets, because of the limited camera angles from the people's point of view. And the whole story, as I've already mentioned, is distorted and manipulated by Rasmussen, so we never really get the full picture. And we also know so little about the crew members, as I've already kind of touched on, and they're not very relatable. And in my opinion, this isn't actually an example of bad writing from Mark Gatiss. For me, it's actually an example of fantastic writing, and some great world building. You know, Mark Gatiss is not afraid to kind of add these things there in the background, to build this world, all these subtle little hints and details. They're not developed, yes, but they don't need to be. They serve their purpose as things in the background, and by having the Doctor informed about things like the Great Catastrophe, or the crew members talking to each other about stuff from their own society and their own world, the dialogue is actually more natural, and it sticks out far less in my opinion, and makes the characters seem more believable. Likewise, with the Morpheus pods, we learn about them through the crew members, because even the Doctor isn't aware of them to start with. The pods themselves are a genius and fascinating concept to kind of build the episode around, because the plot really is based around the Sandmen and these sleep pods. I just love how the song Mr. Sandman is used. It makes the story so much more terrifying, and it's an excellent choice to add to the tension and creepiness of the plot and the action. It's sort of got that ambiguity about it, because yes, it's not really meant to be a sad song, but in this found footage context, in this creepy space station. It's so much more disturbing, I think, and it was an excellent choice of song to use, but also the choice to use a song in the first place was a very well made one. The Sandmen themselves are a fascinating concept, much like the Morpheus pods, and they're very well designed. The fact that we never really see the full costumes only makes them scary in my opinion. In the story, they're always in the shadows, or we never see the full costume because we're limited by the viewpoints of the characters. And that means that fans only have two options really, to see the full costume in more natural light, and that's either in the promotional pictures or at the Doctor Experience, where one of the costumes is displayed in all its glory. I will admit that as a monster, they don't really do much. As Jack Coughlin notes, compared to every other monster slash villain, the Sandmen are rather weak. You've got Daleks, Zygons and Time Lords, then sand. Well, sleep dust. Yes, I can see where you're coming from. I mean, they are sort of scary in a way, but for me it's Rasmussen himself who is the villain of the piece, and he should be the main focus, I think, that the main monster slash villain. The Sandmen are just there in the background. I mean, like a lot of other stuff in this story, they serve their purpose, but perhaps in the sequel, if it goes ahead, it would be nice to explore them a bit more and develop the concept of the Sandman and what they can actually do, you know, how they attack, how they kill people, if they kill people, I don't know. But yeah, that's a good point. The Doctor's gradual realisation about the visual receptors in the dust is played out fantastically. It takes something very standard and ordinary, like the Weeping Angels and stuff like that, you know, sleep dust, but then makes you think twice about what it can do, and it definitely makes you think in the morning when you wake up, and you've got a little bit of sleep dust in the corner of your eye. You know, it's basically saying that could be extrapolated to create a Sandman, which is quite a scary concept really, if taken seriously. Yeah, it's a bit ridiculous, maybe, but for me it works because they take it seriously in this story. You know, they're not exactly joking around about it. And as a concept, the sleep dust and the Morpheus pods do seem quite convincing, in my opinion. This section is summed up nicely by Tom Bowen. Although I would have wanted more of an exploration of a society without sleep, as opposed to setting it exclusively on a space station, the twist was a great addition, and I think would have actually put a few kids off the idea of sleeping. So that's it, that's what I think of Sleep No More, and hopefully it's given you a bit of an insight into why I love it so much. Just to sum up, there's that thing I said earlier about how it's going to be one of those stories that is so much better regarded by fans in, say, 10, 20 years' time. I really think those viewers are going to look back and think, you know, what were these viewers thinking giving it a 4, 5 out of 10? Yes, Sleep No More isn't perfect. It does have some flaws, which I've kind of touched on here. But overall for me, the overwhelming uniqueness of the plot, of the style of shooting, and the concepts that are explored makes it an almost irresistible episode. I can't help but loving it, as I mentioned earlier on, even though so many people dislike or hate it. And if pressed for a rating out of 10, as I usually am at this point in the video, I'd probably be inclined to give it an 8 out of 10, I think. Please let me know in the comments what you think of Sleep No More, if you haven't already, and also comment below or tweet to me at StetsonDoctor your thoughts on Face the Raven, which I'll be looking back at next week. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this quite controversial review, and I'll see you next week for the next one. Bye for now.